Greetings, greetings, divine, all blessed, peace and love, joy and prosperity. Come on in. Welcome, welcome. Habar Ghani, come on in. Alafia, come on in. Bawani, come on in. Kedu, come on in. Salam, come on in. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Greetings and salutations. Greetings, beloved. Greetings, Kiona D. Carter. Greetings, beloved. Welcome come on in. Danielle Jackson, divine, all blessed. Sylvia Bell, Alafia, come on in. Welcome, Iyami, come on in. Daniel Jackson, come on in. Welcome, Andreka. Welcome, beloved. Welcome, Keisha Smith. Come on in, Iyami. Keisha Smith, come on in. Eshu alek buana ko si were awo onlo uto ni iwo ada afan bo o si o batalami ita ni ibo Onelio Aban Eshu. Eshu is the respected elder who flogs, confronts, and uncovers fools. That one versed in mysteries uses truth to own you. He calls to scatter to feed poverty. Obatala shakes rascals to have sacrifice. The owner of warnings is the one who is Eshu Aboru Aboye Aboshishe Ashe. May our Ebo reach a room. May our Ebo be accepted. May our Ebo allow what we desire to come to pass. And so we say Asheo and Ashe. Divine, all blessed peace and love, joy and prosperity, elevation, revelations, manifestation. You are now sitting live with the Divine Prince, Pan-African spiritualist, practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagun Oloye Hoodoo Obeya Bokur, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective, understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing. If you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test in one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. It is indeed my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever-living reality. And it's crucial to the very foundation of my understanding, my walk, my work, my demonstration along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the Divine Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding. That place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe. Today is Tuesday. No, today is Wednesday, June 24th, 2020, and I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you now live, but also virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum universally from this working temple of the House of the Divine Prince, Thai Potions, Hoodoo Central LLC, in this beautiful, historic, most enchanted, and most haunted city in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, the land of my ancestors and those who came before me along this Hoodoo Obeah life path and journey, passing down the great Obeah stick along with the knowledge of the life-giving herbs, roots, plants, rituals, spirits, minerals. Indeed, the culture, the traditions, the legacy, the heritage, our stories, our sacred stories. I am always reminded that the creation of sacred space is critical. It's necessary. It is the foundation of all that we think or do, the creation of sacred space. And that space must first begin inwardly, must begin in the head, must begin in the heart, must begin in the soul, must begin in your body. And then it manifests, it shows up in the outer world as what I define, as what I term demonstration. Indeed, your demonstration is what you believe, what you say you believe, what you really believe, what you really understand. I like to say understand is book. Understanding is when you can make sense of what you've read in the book, what you've been told, what you've seen, and it shows up in your demonstration. Integrity is said to be what you do when people aren't looking. Integrity is said to be what you do when there aren't no witnesses. Integrity is said to be that what you do when there aren't no recorders and no listening devices. It is how we indeed stand up in our truth, stand up in our destiny in each and every moment of every waking day, as the gods and the goddesses that indeed we are. I welcome each and every one of you, individually, but also collectively. Welcome, Seven and Gentlemen, Shadow Tree, Creative, Daniel Jackson, Keisha Smith, Ashe, Asheo, Melissa Diva, Sparkles. Welcome, beloved. Please bring the sparkles. We welcome you. Jennifer, and welcome again, beloved. Welcome all my regular participants and active members. Kim Gladden, welcome, welcome. All my godchildren, welcome. All my students, welcome. And of course, acknowledge the Queen. Please acknowledge Kiona D. Carter. She is my professional moderator. She helps me to keep track, constantly scrolling chat box. She helps me to maintain some sense of order and dignity in this space. Indeed, if I miss your question, your comment, your request, Kiona gonna be on it, and she's gonna let me know, and she's gonna help me to sort of bring things back to the center. You know, I get long-winded. I like to digress, and often I'm moved by spirit. And so your questions move the show, your comments move the show, your participation moves the show. And for that, I am indeed grateful. We are having Shango and Oya and Sakbo and Bade and a little bit of lightning and a little bit of thunder. We got weather going on in New Orleans right now. So I pray our connection is clear. Yes, I see you, Jennifer Anderson. I'm going to speak to that COVID. I'm going to speak to it, beloved, because indeed there was a moment, there was a time when we thought we had this under control. Now all you got to do is go back in the archive, go back a few days, go back a few weeks, go back a month. I predicted this would happen. I predicted it. Now, at first, Black people said they couldn't get it. At first, it was a conspiracy theory. At first, it wasn't real, you know, in our community. And then many got on the bullhorn, celebrities, you know, outward spoken individuals on social media. You know, we got on the bullhorn and we sound the alarms, and many of you hunkered down, protected yourselves, protected your family, protected your children, followed the guidelines of the CDC and the helpful medicinal, medical, professional information that we received about this virus. But then the protests began, and at first, not the Black Lives Matter. Remember now, first it was to open it up. The patriots screaming, open up the country. And I said, oh no, y'all, don't fall for that. It's too soon, it's too early And many people didn't move. Many people didn't go out. But then what one thing will drive people into the street? Young people, old people, white people, black people. What's the one thing that will drive people into the street? A lynching, a public lynching, a viewable, videotaped, broadcast globally through social media public lynching. That indeed is the one thing that will be a catalyst to get people out of their houses. Now I've taken a very clear position on the protesting. Listen, if you're clean, if you're following the weather, if you're protecting yourself, if you're young, if you got a strong immune system, if you handle your business, somebody needs to protest. Someone needs to be on the front lines. Someone needs to do a little guerrilla warfare. But for the rest of us, 50 and over, diabetics, asthmatics, people with pre-existing conditions, black people, this virus clearly has a bias for black people, for people of color. Stay at home. Stay your ass at home. There are other ways to get involved. There are other ways to support. There's other ways to be active in the demonstrations, active in the protests, without having to be out there in the street. But then the events and the holidays and the gathering and the party, that's just foolishness. That's just foolishness. Wherever it's found, you know, we don't want to pick on Atlanta. We don't want to pick on Chicago. We don't want to pick on Texas. But all you got to do is look at the news. Absolutely, beloved. It's out of control. It's on the rise again. And there will be another shutdown. Remember, I said it. There will be another shutdown. It's coming relatively quickly. Somewhere between, what's today, the 24th, July, maybe even into August. School may indeed be shut down, and in the process of being shut down as we speak, or at least virtualized, moved into a format that some people, because we know that internet is not equal, service is not equal, people's ability to pay for internet is not equal. So we know when we start looking at educating and educating at home, again, there are resources there that need to be fulfilled. But I'm proud of my erudite audience and those who stay clean, maintain their hygiene. You know, those of us who practice hoodoo, conjure, voodoo, Ifa, Santeria, live with and exist within a level of hygienic perfection. It's a requirement in the tradition. You can't say you housing gods and deities and Loa and Orisha, and you're living in clutter, and you're living in filth, and you're living in disorder, and you're living in feng shui madness. So some of us had bleach, had ammonia, kept things clean, kept things tidy, maintained, you know, a certain level of order even before this came. But indeed, now it's the time to step it up. Now it's the time to hunker down. This ain't the time to pretend like this is over. This ain't the time to pretend like, oh, wow, we had this 48-hour flu and it didn't pass. That's not what this is. If we look at the country, if we look at the planet as a living, breathing organism, as a person, as an individual, this ain't over. It's still in her body. It still needs to be flushed out. It still needs to be addressed with an antidote, okay, if you will. And so in all things, before I get too far ahead of myself, acknowledge the ancestors. Egu mopeo, egu mopeo, egu mopeo, famini alapia, famini ire, famini iwapele, madope pupo, asheo, ashe, asheo, ashe. We must, in all things, call and acknowledge your ancestors. Those of you who aren't quite familiar with ancestral honor and worship, we're not talking about necromancy. We're talking about acknowledging those who laid the foundation, those who came before. We now have scientific proof of something that we always knew in Voodoo, and that is that ancestral memory survives in the blood. Survives in the blood. So there's no forgetting about what happened in the past. There's no forgetting about the mistakes of the past. There's no forgetting about the inroads and foundations that keep racism and white supremacy and many other isms in our culture alive. If we don't cut things at the root, if we don't sever things at the root, if we don't dissect things clearly and openly and honestly, and allow the healing to take place, allow the healing to take place. I look at the planet and the air and the environment. Indeed, there's a healing that took place. There's a healing that's still happening, with the slowdown of traffic and the slowing down of pollution and the slowing down of all the normal activity that goes on in many of our lives. And so as the country presents this illusion of opening up, because I ain't going for it and many of you ain't going for it either, but as they present this illusion of opening it up, remember to cleanse, purify, not just your hands, but your mind, your body, your spirit, your intentions, your motivations. We came here to talk about indwelling spirits today. And let me tell you, in doing my research in the last 4 days, I've gone through a number of books. I've gone through a number of documents, a number of theses, everything from indwelling, just trying to research the word indwelling. I was really amazed how many of the dictionaries took a Christian perspective, a very obvious and overt Christian perspective on indwelling and what indwelling means. Not just indwelling spirits, which is what I searched first, but then indwelling, just the word indwelling often had a heavily Christianized connotation to it. It was very difficult to find. I actually typed in indwelling spirits, parentheses, nudges. And that helps some, but not a whole lot. And I've said in previous shows, when examining indigenous culture, ATR, Orisha, Loa, Voodoo, all these various traditions, you've got to have your grammar together. You've got to have some vocabulary in terms of what you're looking for. My sister went on a journey of defining Odu the other day and was amazed at how little information she was able to pull up, with just the word Odu. And of course, I had to add some words to it to help her sort of navigate how to get that information to show up for you in the search engine. So I strongly advise, playing around with your wording, rewording what you're searching, thinking a little bit more about what it is that you're searching from a more open perspective, and then see what your search engine comes up with. The Merriam-Webster had the cleanest definition of indwelling, in my opinion, that didn't have religion attached to it. Being an inner, activating, or guiding force. The second definition for indwelling primarily relates to medical indwelling, something that is, inserted in the body, put into the body for some purpose, drainage or something of that nature. But almost every other reference went straight into religion. And from a very Christian perspective, even if the words Holy Ghost, Holy Spirit were not used, they were applied. And again, I went back to the dictionary, even the Merriam-Webster, and it suggests a date, 1646. 1646, in which the sense of indwelling in a human is even used, is even documented, is even referenced. Now, 1646, that's a curious date in the time spectrum of Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and these books that we now tout as the Word of God, as the universal master code books, if you will. So there's a definite influence that we've always been able to document with the conquistadors and the subduing of the world, colonizing of the world, not just for God's sake, but for resources, for land, indeed for power and control. And so not only did they spread racism, not only did they spread mid-Atlantic slave trading, not only did they spread white supremacy, but they also spread as a tool of this mechanism, a religious ideology, a religious philosophy, a way of looking at the world, if you will, that's left an imprint, even in our language, even in our grammatic usage. When I look at trying to figure out what the wording would have been, predating 1646, what people have said about indwelling spirits before that date, I found that it was a wealth of information. I found that indigenous cultures all over the world, to include ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, etc., Great Zimbabwe, indwelling of spirit was synonymous with living. Indwelling of spirit was implied. It was to be expected, if you will. When we look at the definition of animism, and often archaeologists and scientists who tried not to use religious wording or even ethnocultural wording imprint animism on top of indigenous cultures, on top of Yoruba culture, Akan culture, Mayan culture, Aztec culture. They say we were animist. And animism, its dictionary definition is the attribution of a soul to plants, inanimate objects, and natural phenomenon, or belief in a supernatural power that originates and animates the material world. In a sentence, the belief, the understanding that all things in creation have a spirit. If we say God created the world, God created earth, the God has created humanity, God created the universe, then indeed it would exist within itself, right? So that's why I say I and I. The Rastas say I and I. It unifies us and consciousness with the divine, with the creators. So in the indigenous world, pre-world, spirit indwelling was a given. Indwelling of spirit was to be expected in everything, humanity, people, places, and things. It is with that Judeo-Christian Islamic influence that we begin to separate indwelling by something divine, indwelling by particularly the Holy Spirit, from forms of indwelling, to the point that the word usage begin to change. So we find words like possession, we spirit possession, demonic possession. We find an over exertion of scientific foundation in this area. So we're talking about mental health. We're talking about insanity. We're talking about multiple personality disorders, as opposed to acknowledging spirit. Back when I was in, 12th grade, and you're supposed to be figuring out who you are and what you're going to do, and what kind of job are you going to, work, and what kind of career, are you going to be living your life in? And of course, they say, oh, take your time. There's no rush, but hurry up and get that major down, get that minor down on this paperwork, so we can move things forward. And so I originally zeroed in on psychology. But then once I got in there and started looking around at some of the books and some of the tenets, and some of the teachings, that's when I first noted that this spiritual component was absent, was missing, was not being addressed, was not being applied. And indeed, even your magical books say, check the spirit, test the spirit. Know, is that spirit of God? Is that spirit of man? Is that spirit of earth? Is that spirit of the devil? Are we looking at a hormonal chemical imbalance? Even your magical book suggests that you should test the spirit. But we don't test the spirit anymore. We don't test the spirit anymore. And we either have one lane or the other. It's mental health, it's drug abuse, it's something else going on. We don't address spirit. And many of the practices that this circle, this community, this square, are researching, studying, dabbling in, initiating in, playing around with, open you up to spirits, open you up to indwelling spirits. If your mind, if your consciousness is able to embrace Holy Spirit, Holy Ghost, the receiving of this divine power that not only reanimates you, makes you brand new, but gives you power, gives you the ability to heal, gives you the ability to cast out devils, then why not the notion, the idea of other forms of indwelling spirit that might not be holy, that might not be in your best interest, that might not be divine? One of the few documents that I could find, document, books, thesis, I looked at many recorded material over the last few days, but one in particular, a book called, get your pen out, because y'all said y'all want books, y'all want authors. I'm about to give you a whole bunch right now. Demons, Daemon, Daemons, and Spirits in the Ancient Egypt. Demons and Spirits in Ancient Egypt. Except this author spells it Daemons. If you want to find this book, Carolyn Graves-Brown. Carolyn Graves-Brown. And there's a passage in the book that really jumped out at me because, one, it used exactly the wording, the order wording that I was looking for, but it spoke to the topic. She's talking about, in this particular case, Ptah, but many other statuary in ancient Egypt that are said to be imbued with the god or imbued with the spirit, or hence spirit indwelling. The result, these are her words, the result is sometimes termed indwelling. And she's talking about the act of sculpture or sculpting a statue was designated as mes, M-E-S or M-S in ancient Egyptian, mes, which also means to give birth to. And a sculptor was he who brings to life. Funeral ritual required craftsmen to transfigure the deceased, and rituals could involve building and manufacturing of statuary, temple spaces that allow the spirit to dwell within it. The result is sometimes termed indwelling, and they use a Germanic word, Einwohnung, 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 by Egyptologists, which means indwelling. If you look that word up, it means indwelling. One could argue that this term has very Judeo-Christian associations. Basically, however, in order to see the difference, one must follow our own classification system and impose them upon the past, much as I, meaning this author, Carolyn Graves-Brown, did in the book. And so in the case of possession, the possessed is clearly the second or secondary agent. Certain living or even inanimate objects could be possessed by gods, demons, and spirits of the dead. The act could either be positive or negative. Possession by demons and spirits, called Imtwa or Aqua, were called Nessi in ancient Egypt. And that has a name that suggests it was seen as different from other forms of indwelling possession. Not enough is known, according to this author, of Egyptian belief systems to make clear exactly what the difference between possession and indwelling was. Magical texts show that for a spell to become effective, the practitioner must assimilate a deity. Assimilate a deity. That's call down a deity, become the deity, be possessed by a deity, if you will. Priests, too, talk with divine authority when carrying out a ritual, such as the ritual of opening of the mouth. The god also dwelt temporarily in divine statues and in votive animal mummies, but these hosts had to be repeatedly vivified to ensure the lasting services of the gods. Or they had to be fed, they had to be placated, they had to be empowered, they had to be renewed to keep the spirit, if you will, inside the vessel, the person, place, or thing in which the god or the spirit was being placed. One might think of the host of the god as equating to the him in ancient Egypt. Translation him, incarnation, or bodily form. It is the word used by kings, cult statues, scarabs, and the mummified apis, the heme. In English, we would spell that H-E-M. In Kemetic alphabet, they have H-M, heme. And it meant servant. However, the author is not sure the word was also used to specifically denote mummified votive animals. So again, we're talking about the indwelling spirit, particularly as it relates to humans. One might argue that the god, unlike the uh, divinized statue, was only seen in exceptional circumstances, meaning to see a god was seen as a powerful thing. So to see the statue was to see the god. To see the god was to see the statue. And so when you think about Kemetic culture, ancient Egypt, and the tomb, within the tomb, within the tomb, the layer within the layer within the layer, and the concealment of the statuary was not just to hide them from tomb robbers, if you will, but to prevent people from even accidentally gazing upon them, and then gazing upon them, of course, with the most negative or unnatural or unintegritous intentions, could invoke the anger or the response, a negative response from the god and or the power. One may argue that the god, unlike the divinized statue, was only seen in exceptional circumstances. However, divine statues were also hidden. Furthermore, seeing the statue meant seeing the god. God and statue were so connected that gods were described in terms relating to statues. For example, the snake god in the story of the shipwrecked sailor had blue skin overlaid with gold and eyebrows of lapis lazuli. I talk and teach about lapis lazuli as being a stone of consciousness and cosmic intellect. And Kemetic or ancient Egyptian pharaohs often lined their crowns or wore some sort of jewelry or amulets that would keep lapis lazuli at this area of their head to ensure rational, reasonable, clear thinking, clear uh, decision making. So, for example, the snake god in the story of the shipwrecked sailor is described as having skin overlaid with gold and eyebrows of lapis lazuli. God children in Papyrus Westcar were born with limbs overlaid with gold and wearing lapis lazuli headdresses. The secondary agent influences the source. Likewise, in the case of divinity and minerals, did gods reflect the quality of minerals, or do minerals reflect the quality of gods, of powers, of Loa and Orisha? Gold, being shiny and resistant to decay, shared qualities with the sun god in ancient Egypt. And the blessed dead, the qualities are not simply metaphors, but active divine entities. Shininess and immortality are inherent in the materials themselves. And again, this book is Demons or Daemons, Daemons, and Spirits in Ancient Egypt. Another book that I looked at by one of my favorite Voodoo authors, Mami Wata, Mama Vivian. And this book is called Mami Wata, Africa's Ancient Goddess Unveiled, Volume 1. And in this passage, Mami Isi Vivian Hunter Hindru talks about a prophet or a healer or a spiritualist that she had a relationship with in Togo, who provided healing services in the community there and answered some questions for her. And one of the questions that was being asked was, does he work with each patient or student individually and give each one what is best for that person specifically? Now, many of you who practice Ifa, who are actively involved in Voodoo, who've seen real divination, who've seen real Odu thrown on the table, understand that an Odu it isn't a Orisha unto itself, is a power unto itself, but can be described almost like a capsule of information, proverbs, wisdom, taboos, things you should avoid, things you should seek out, things that help you along your journey, things that bring healing. Of course, nature, a list of herbs, plants, roots, and even minerals to apply and utilize in the application of any request that might present it before Orula, that might be presented before Orumila, that might be presented before the spirits, the deities that govern divination. And so this prophet that she's questioning, whose name is Akuete, says yes, maybe the spirit will say that the crystal ball will take a certain form. Then we would need to ask the people who make the crystal ball or crystal stone to make it in exactly the shape that the spirit commands. Then when a person finishes the teaching, I can put the spirit inside the stone and the person can take the stone home and have the spirit with them. Now, some of my godchildren already know that I do this. If you have ancestral work and divination done, and you've reached a certain level of proficiency with that, you're sort of gifted, rewarded, if you will, with these implements that I box up and FedEx to you in the mail. And they often include 2 larger clay pots and a smaller clay pot, often referred to as the mouth of creation. And within that is often contained minerals, crystals, some form of gemstone. So the idea of gemstones, the idea of tarot, the idea of astrology, these are not Western things. All of these sciences, if you will, follow humanity. And archaeology says that humanity was birthed in motherland, in Mother Africa. And so too, the usage of crystal, mineral, and stone for healing work, for ritual work, for spell work, for magical work, for defensive and protective work, for offensive work and creative work, has been well documented within the motherland, within indigenous cultures, practices, and traditions. And no, it's not new to New Age. No, it's not new to our modern application of these stones. What is new is our polishing them, shaping them, making them into other items and useful, creative, cute jewelry pieces. That is new. How they're being offered to us is new. But their application in ATR and in healing and in religion and spirituality is indeed not. So we see a footprint of not just indwelling spirit in man and humanity, but the further we go back in historic time, more so in nature itself. It's seen as a byproduct of nature itself. It's only in the more modern historic time that we designate it to divine or Holy Spirit only, and then everything else is somehow vilified, demonized, rebuked, if you will. And it shows the hand of white supremacy. It shows the hand of racism. It shows the hand of its presence in world religion and how we view religions. How many of you, even now, can't breathe and close your eyes and envision God without seeing a white man? How many of you have evolved, have healed, have reprogrammed that to where you don't use references that immediately go back to Christianity? You know, because I have black people, red people, brown people, you know, tell me every day, you know, oh, well, I don't go to church. I don't believe in the Bible, you know, but your sensibilities, your ideas, right down in that second and third chakra, how you view the world is often extremely Christianized if you have not actively sought to reprogram that. And of course, if you're brought up in the Islamic part of the world, it's going to be Islamicized. If you're brought up in the Hindi part of the world, it's going to be, you know, Hindu is going to be your go-to archetype in your head, in your consciousness. And often that is improgrammed between 5 years old and birth sticks with you, rides with you for life. Another book, you might want to write this one down: Conjure in African American Society. Conjure in African American Society by Jeffrey E. Anderson. I have all these books on my shelf, on my library in Google Books, by the way. Books that I study, I read, that I find, that I own, that I use in teaching. I often them in my Shelfari, which now has a new name, and also in my Google Books. So again, in the study of locating words, references that speak to spirit and indwelling spirit, I came upon this book, and I've read this book. I've had this book on my shelf maybe, I don't know, 10 years maybe, by Jeffrey E. Anderson. Modern American conjure is a mixture of magical beliefs originating in two zones of European settlement, which remain quite distinct during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The first of these areas to be settled by substantial numbers of European colonists was the Atlantic coast, comprising Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, by which my people were among them, by the way. My 23andMe has demonstrated that my lineage, on my mother's side, my mother's mother's side, originates with some of that first group of Africans that were in that settlement. So the first of these areas to be settled were Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We refer to that as the Gullah Geechee area today. These British colonies received shipments of slaves beginning in 1619, and the trade accelerated in the 17th and 18th centuries. So if we were coming here in 1619, Voodoo had to come with us. Voodoo in the New World predates the Haitian Revolution. But please hear me. Please hear me. Voodoo came here when we came here. Voodoo got here when I got here. Voodoo got here when your grandmama and your grandpapa got here. Voodoo got here when you came here, not during the Haitian Revolution. I think it was more heightened during the Haitian Revolution out of fear. Fear. They meaning the colonists, meaning the oppressors, equated voodoo with slave rebellion. With slave rebellion, they didn't care about your gods and your ancestors and your low wine. They didn't care about that. Your dancing, your drumming. They cared about a slave insurrection. They cared about war and uprising and civil war and murdering. That was their reasoning behind stamping out something that they didn't really believe in anyway, people. They didn't believe we had any kind of power, we had any kind of authority. They didn't quite grasp that it was empowering us. In their mind, it was just inciting us. Inciting is very different than empowering. I can incite you to an argument. I can incite you to get caught up in your feelings. I can incite you to get emotional, in social media. That's not the same as empowering you to do something, to take an action, to make a move. So the idea of indwelling spirit and that being critical to not just person, place, or thing, the doll, the effigy, the implement, but also to how we as a people organize, communicate, adapt, acculturate ourselves within the confines of this system that we still exist in, that we still live under. In the land settled by the French and the Spanish, the Fan, Yoruba, Ewe, Mandi speakers of northern West Africa laid the groundwork for an African American culture, particularly through their heavy importation during the colonial period. In Louisiana, in particular, these and closely related people made up more than half of all Africans brought into the area. Let me say it again: the Fan, the Yoruba, the Ewe, and the Mandi. That's important for you all who are trying to figure out lineage. That's important for you all who think you need to decide between Ifa and Voodoo. There is no Voodoo without Ifa. There is no Ifa. Once you understand the difference between herbology, plants, and the magic in nature itself, and then the direction that's given by way of divination, by way of this ancient mathematical form of divination that runs your computer, that makes your computer technology work. It's far superior than a piece of paper. It's far superior than tarot. And that's why I've given up tarot. I have given up tarot. I did my last official tarot reading. I'm not doing any more tarot. From here on out, it's all voodoo. It's all voodoo. So whoever you might be, wherever you might come from, whatever your background might be, we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that as it relates to how we operate in African traditional religious systems. In Louisiana in particular, these and closely related people made up more than half of all Africans brought into the area. And during the early Republican and antebellum periods, the number of slaves from northwestern Africa declined drastically. West Central Africans replaced them, the largest number of whom hailed from the Congo Kingdom. And despite the shift in importation patterns, the early presence of slaves from the closely related cultures of the Fan, Ewe, Yoruba, and the more distinct Mandi defined the area's magical practices. Later arrivals modified but could not replace them. Moreover, in both French Louisiana and Spanish Florida, brief spurts of immigration from the Caribbean bolstered the influence of the earlier groups. In Louisiana, these were Haitian refugees fleeing revolution. In Florida, the late 19th century Yeah, in Florida, the late 19th century arrival of Afro-Cubans seeking economic opportunity not only bolstered existing beliefs, but also created large Black communities in areas where none had existed previously. And that's why we see such a heavy influence of Yoruba, Ifa, Lukumi, Santeria, Palo within our community, within our virtual community, within our social media community of people seeking out, desiring greater connection to ATR and African-based traditional systems. While West Central Africans provided only a secondary influence in the Latin area, they were the primary influence on the magic of the region settled by the English. Their numbers were primarily pronounced in coastal South Carolina and Georgia, where they made up more than half of all imports throughout the period when slavery was legal. Once again, the Congo people were the largest contingent among the unwilling arrivals from West Central Africa. Also, as in Louisiana, the Mandee were a significant, though minority, presence, although the chief features of conjure derive from the Fon, the Ewe, and the Yoruba. Although the chief features of conjure derive from the Fon, the Ewe, and the Yoruba in Latin areas, the Congo in the lands settled by the English and the Mandee in both other groupings, including the Igbo, the Akan, the Dongme, played important roles in the creation of African American culture, especially in particular aspects of Hoodoo. The ethnic differences between the settlers of the Latin and English cultural zones led to persistent differences between the areas. One of the most obvious of these distinctions was the difference in words used to refer to conjure. In New Orleans, where French influence dominated, whites knew African American synchronistic religion and its associated magic as voodoo, while blacks called it hoodoo. So that distinction between voodoo and hoodoo originated out of racism, originated in keeping our knowledge separate from the appropriation of our knowledge. And that's why some people still to this day believe that the usage of voodoo with four O's or hoodoo even suggests some kind of bastardizing, some kind of watering down, some kind of application of spirit to something Western or something mixed or synchronized or syncretized or even appropriated. Male practitioners were typically known as traitors or wangators, and female practitioners as wangatorses or tutorses. Grigris and Zinzin denoted charms and spells, while Tobis and Wangas were more specific words for good and evil charms, respectively. In Missouri, Nudu, Nudu with the N like Nancy, Nudu, a variant of voodoo, was the favorite term for the practice of African American magic. In southern Florida, an area long ruled by Spain, a voodoo-like religion and magical system developed from the Santeria and Palo Mayombe faiths practiced by Cuban immigrants in the area. It was known as in Inangio, Inangigo, Inanio, Inanio, Nanigo, Inanio. My Spanish speakers help me out. And its priest and priestess were known as Papa Loas and Mama Loas, respectfully. Conjurers were termed Bruja and Brujo. Along the English settled Atlantic seaboard, Black sorcerers called themselves conjurers, root workers, and double heads or two-headed doctors. The performance of their art was known by such words as conjure, rooting, tricking, fixing, gophering, suggesting gopher dust, In some cases, terms were localized. For instance, in Maryland, where I was educated from kindergarten to 12th grade, many Blacks knew conjurers as high men and high women. Likewise, root workers was a designation particularly popular along the Georgia and South Carolina coast, as was gopher, a term almost unknown outside of the English cultural areas. In Mississippi, African Americans used mojo to refer to benevolent magic. Virginian Blacks sometimes called conjuring gumbree work, though the words used for conjure varied widely throughout the South. Terms deriving from European language were more common in areas settled by Anglos. The influence of specific African cultures is readily apparent in some of the unique terms applied to conjure, particularly those of the Latin zone. Voodoo derived from the Fon and airway term voodoo, V-O-D-U, meaning God or worship or fear of the gods, fear of the gods. Hoodoo, originally used in the Latin area to identify conjure, is most likely a variation of voodoo. However, Zora Neale Hurston claimed that it was a corruption of juju, another West African term meaning magic or charm. The Louisiana terms Grigri, Zinzin, Wanga, denoting various types of spells and charms, likewise derived from West African terms. Grigri, a general term for magic, came from the Mandingo tribe, a subgroup of Mandee speakers who use magical terms known as jerry jerrys or, or Grigory bags or Girigiri bags to harm others. Mandee speaking members of the Bambara tribe introduced the term Zinzin, which referred to positive charms designed to confer strength or power on their possessors. Wanga, denoting malevolent magic and charms, and the derived terms Wangatur or Wangaturis were probably also of Mandee origin. Toby, remember Toby was what they tried to change Kunta Kinte's name to in Roots. Toby reflected the early Republican and antebellum influx of West Central African Congos, whose Toby tribe, I'm sorry, not tribe, whose Toby charm brought good luck to the owners. So Toby was an African word, T-O-B-E. They spell it T-O-B-Y, but Toby was still an African word, meaning juju or voodoo charm. In Florida, the types of papaloi or mamaloa were the African American creolization of the Yoruba word for diviner or herbalist, which is babalawo. Conjure terminology with African origins was rare outside the Latin cultural area. Conjure terminology with African origins was rare outside of the Latin cultural area. Gopher, used in such combinations as gopher doctor or gopher dust, was an exception to the rule. Employed in coastal Georgia and the Carolinas to designate items derived from the dead or persons dealing with the dead. It most likely developed from the Congo word kufwa, meaning to die. Mojo and its variant Jomo were Congo-derived terms found in both cultural zones that describe magic and charms, usually designed for positive ends. In the Congo Kingdom, moyo referred to spirits that dwelt within magical charms and was easily transferred to the spirit's dwelling place. Moyo, spirits that dwelt within a charm or a moyo might be the location in the house, in the church, in the building, in the yard where that spirit is kept and or housed. More than simply words survive the Middle Passage. However, in the Latin area, African deities continue to play a role in the lives of Blacks. According to Kofi Asare Apoku, author of the book West African Traditional Religions, traditional Northwestern gods and spirits were of 6 types. First, remember now, we're talking about indwelling spirits. First, there was a unique being, often far separated from humanity, who gave life and power to all other beings, including lesser gods and spirits. You might call that God. You might call that Olodumare. Among Fon speakers, this being known as Mawolisa, an androgynous god, goddess incarnate in the moon and the sun. Among Yoruba speakers, Olorun filled the role of supreme being, Olorun. Virtually every other West African people had such a god. While Africans prayed to these supreme beings, they rarely offered sacrifice or otherwise sought to win their favor. Being so perfect had no need of such mundane acts of service. If a God is perfect, if a God creates all things, in a West African context, that God wouldn't need anything from us. That God wouldn't desire anything from us. Uh, that God wouldn't have sort of the humanistic characteristics that the Bible suggests: a jealous God, a vengeful God, a wrathful God. We didn't suggest those type of humanistic characteristics to the Supreme Creator. We view the Supreme Creator as being supreme, as being above human frailty, human pettiness, human carnality, and human desire. And this is where non-ATR practicing individuals begin to run into a conflict about what Loa is, what Orisha is, what those spirit powers are in place with the Most High, the Supreme Deity. I often get asked, you practice voodoo. Well, do y'all believe in God? Yes. Do y'all believe in heaven and hell? Yes. Do y'all believe in the devil and Satan? Yes. But there are also the powers that navigate the natural world that exists within nature. Water, fire, air, God-like powers, God-like manifestations for which humanity would have its being or its existence, let alone the life, that we live and operate in, outside of just our physical nature. While Africans prayed to these supreme beings, they rarely gave them offerings. We rarely sought their favor. We rarely sought to influence Jehovah, Allah, God, to meet our needs, if you will. We sought the next tier in the spiritual hierarchy in order to fulfill those roles. While Africans prayed to supreme beings and didn't give their offerings, the next tier in the spiritual hierarchy was filled with ancestral spirits, whom West Africans believed existed alongside their living descendants. So you hear me say the ancestor foundation. The ancestors are the foundation. It's not a negation of God. It's not a negation of the supreme creator, who indeed created all things, all of us, including the ancestors. But your ancestors show up in your blood. Your ancestors show up in your DNA. Your ancestors show up as your first line of defense. Yes, Kiona, I'm realizing now I've talked for an hour and 10 minutes. And it's gotten good to me, and I know it's gotten good to you. Greetings, Keone, beloved. I just opened your mic. Please forgive me.
Eric, I'm loving it.
And Eric code 765. I'm gonna come to you next. And then 857, I'm coming to you next. How you doing, Kiana? Bob O'Neill, beloved.
I am real good. I am loving it. I love it when you reference to the books. You know, you are a teacher by nature. That's just who you are, and I'm really loving it. This is a great show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for being our adored moderator, our sergeant of arms, if you will. Sort of help us to keep it together in the stream of things. I am going to have to give you my password and let you handle this chat, because it's just too much for me to talk and teach and handle this chat. And I like to show everybody. I like to make
ready.
Yeah, I like to make sure everybody's face shows up on the screen and everybody's comment shows up in the screen. And then I get caught up in the subject matter, and then it gets away from me. It gets away from me. So I'm not ignoring anybody. Please forgive me. I haven't picked out like my favorite people to host. That's not what's happening. But the chat keeps moving, and so I have to stop talking and then focus on the chat and then highlight each point in the chat and then go back to my conversation. I also want to open area code 765. 765. Who's calling? Where are you calling from, beloved?
Hi, this is Patrick from Illinois.
Greetings. You know, I was born in Illinois. I was born in Chicago.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I've been here 25 years.
So what was that? Sorry.
I've been here 25 years.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm about 27, so I don't know how much, or how deep into astrology you get, but I'm coming upon my first Saturn return here pretty soon.
Okay, great.
Which is supposed to be a major sort of turning point.
And
so,
what's
I've been trying to do a little bit of work and prepare.
And what's your birthday?
2/28. That's 28, 93.
93. Okay, yes indeed, beloved. Yes indeed. How can I help you?
So I guess like going back early. Oh, sorry.
How can I help you? What's your question or comment?
Okay, so going back earlier when you first started talking about indwelling spirits and animism specifically, I guess it just got me to thinking sort of what the difference would be between us and a tree or a rock or whatever else, having a physical vessel, and then just the spirits that would dwell within us would sort of be the primary us. And I guess the question was just like what it means to be alive is what sort of came up as you were talking.
What it is to be alive. Yeah. I'm just repeating what you said. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. 100%. And even when I think about my spiritual journey, the books I've read, the mentors I've sat up under, the things that I've studied, coming along my journey, and particularly in those years between age 21 and 33, I thought of those in that similar fashion. What's really the nature of life? What really is the nature of being? Why are we here? What indeed is the purpose? And so from that animistic perspective, all things have a spirit. What indeed separates us from the rock, the tree, the bug, the animal? We would like to think in all of our human arrogance, that it's our knowledge, that it's our consciousness, that it's our wisdom. But what evidence do we have scientifically that trees don't possess the same degree of consciousness, just don't move, just don't act, just sit still? And so it causes me, Patrick, to look back at Hindu culture. The largest population of Africans outside the continent of Africa are in India. A lot of us forget that. So, and even when we look at humanity, Neanderthals, the progression of humanity, India and Southeast Asia plays a large role in sort of our conceptualization of God and spirit. And so when I look at that root, karma, rebirth, recreation, reincarnation, we're talking about evolution. of mind, spirit, body. So we might come back as a tree just to be still, just to listen, just to absorb. And of course, that's something that as in our human form, we can choose to do that. That's what the meditating Swami does. That's what the person who chooses to sit still and be quiet is doing. Pretend, and that's some of the tools that I use in my teaching practice too, by the way, Patrick. I ask people to meditate, pretend to be a tree, pretend to be water. Imagine yourself as earth or clay or land or animals or insects. And I believe that in that hierarchy of things, humanity has had to exist in all those things. We once were dirt. We once were clay. We once were the bug, the tree, the elephant, the giraffe. And so now we are quote unquote human or God-like, or God now manifesting in flesh at a higher vibratory rate, if you will. And so we're supposed to be doing God-like things, manifesting God-like powers. When we look at the text, I like to call them the magical books. The one book says, greater works than I've done, you shall do. Greater works than I've done, you should do. So I find it hard to understand why Christians can't hear truth in that. That if your Christ says greater works than I, the Christ, the Son of God did, you'll do, then that means we all Christ. That means we all God-like. That means we all have the power and the ability to be God-like, just like we all have the power and ability to be demonic, to be the devil, to represent darkness, to represent fear and illusion. So we all have that connection to the realm of that which is indwelling. Another point, Patrick, I want to make while I have you on the phone is quantum metaphysics and the understanding that in order for us to have this reality, we have to exist in at least 11 dimensional spaces at once, not just length and width, and depth. Even time is said to occupy only one of the 11 dimensional spaces. Freud also said that within that, anything you can envision, anything you can imagine, no matter how colorful, no matter how horrific, exists in another space, in one of those dimensional time spaces. He said, and he demonstrated through math, that some of those spaces mirror our space, except that suit might be blue, except that other suit might be green. I might be wearing all white in one of those other dimensional spaces. But then there are other spaces that don't mirror our reality at all. And so going back to, well, what makes us who we are, we're not separate from nature. We indeed are a part of nature, but it is that God consciousness that allows us to not only think and process, but to do, to act, to move things. Some people would say that their dogs have consciousness. I'm not a pet person in particular. I like fish. I'm happy with fish. But I know people who are pet people. My sister, my brother. I get pet people in my family, and they swear animals have consciousness, and I believe that. I do. Animals do have consciousness. They may not be able to talk the way we do. They may not have hands or the apparatus to then move things the way that we do. So we learn their language. We learn their signal. The dog leaves the house and doesn't return. It might mean follow me. It might mean come find me. It might mean I've located something that you need to come see. And we learn that, over time. So we are God, in a sense, in the flesh, in that we have that ability to not only process consciousness, but then apply it in a way that's God-like, then build in a way that's God-like, then create and recreate a reality, that's God-like, that insects and plants and other aspects of nature are not vibrating at the present level to do so. Who said there wasn't a time that dinosaurs ruled the earth, insects ruled the earth, and had consciousness. We don't know that.
I was kind of cutting out a little bit on my side, but I just hate to interrupt, but one thing that I really like what you just said, because one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is sort of like, as above, so below is something that people say a lot. But when it comes to mirroring and reflecting things, I guess one of the things that I've been coming up on is that I feel like we don't necessarily always have to be a mirror. And so I really enjoyed that you said, there are some of those dimensions that don't necessarily reflect the one that we're in now, because then I feel like that sort of gives us a little bit of a window to step into a greater sort of sovereignty in our own lives. To say that, this is something that I do not like, I will reach into what I do not see. And then I will, from the spark that I am, have that reflect outside of me and become my reality. And so it's been a lot of really sort of concepts, I guess, building up on themselves, and especially looking at a lot of things, like I said lately, it's just like, I don't necessarily feel that everything happening is a reflection of me. But I do understand that there are some, that is part of the, the total space that we are in, but there are, again, other parts that.
Listen, I agree with you, but let me expand it just a little bit for you. You might say you might say the racism that I see is not a reflection of me. You might say that. You might say the white supremacy that I'm seeing in the world and on TV and in my community is not a reflection of me. But how true is that really? Think about it. Not just where you are in terms of, because I say this on my show all the time. I don't know if you're a new listener. I'm not familiar with your name, but I say this on my show a lot. Be sure that you get the white supremacy out of you first, that you get the racism out of you first, that you get the prejudice and the bias out of you first, before we start looking outside ourselves. And that's hard for some people to grasp. My motto is all is a blessing. And I go within and look at myself first. So don't look at it as, I'm a direct and an immediate contributor to this problem, because there's aspects of yourself that you might not be aware of. You might not remember. You might not know what you did 300 years ago, 500 years ago. You might not remember yet who you were in 1500, 1600. Were you a slave catcher? Were you the oppressor? Were you the person who sat back quietly while it was happening and didn't say or do anything? So I know it's a big thing to look at, particularly when I think of my younger years, when I was more depressive, had clinical depression and experienced that as a part of my demonstration. It was very hard for me to conceptualize everything begins and ends with me. I create and recreate my reality, because at that time, everything was negative. My dad was negative, my past was negative, my childhood was negative, being a Black gay man in America was negative, everything was negative. And so you're asking me to accept responsibility for all this negativity that I perceive as outside of me. It's a little trick of the mind that a spirit person has to mature into. You don't get it when you're young, quite. You don't get it when you're a young spiritual person, quite. But as you grow and you develop more experience, I assure you, it then begins to make more sense that I'm being reflected back at myself. And sometimes it's positive and sometimes it's negative. Sometimes the negative comes along to remind you just where your weaknesses are. Sometimes the negative comes along to remind you just where your power is. So it might not be an immediate extension of you, or something you've done, or something that you said, or something you can readily connect to. But when we look at life on a much bigger scale, particularly with that reincarnation aspect in there, we're here to fix something, to repair something, to replace something, to renew something, to create and recreate something. And I like too that you got the message from me just now that we have the ability to create a reality that we cannot see. Because in my depressive years, I couldn't see this. I couldn't see New Orleans. I couldn't see no future. I grew up really thinking I would be dead by 30. Really. I thought I would be dead at 30. And I know there are a lot of Black men out there who have that. You might not have said it, but it's in there somewhere. That was my reality. So yeah. I couldn't envision who I was going to be at 40, what I was going to be doing, you know, at 40. So I like that you got that message, that even if it's not being demonstrated, even if your parents didn't do the right thing, even if you don't have peers in your neighborhood that are reflecting the life that you believe to be living, create it, recreate it. And every time you write it down, every time you paint it, every time you draw it, every time you remember it, every time you envision it, it's becoming that much more real in this dimensional time space. Give me a moment, beloved. I'm going to unmute area code 857. Everybody is unmuted. So if you have background noise, just mute yourself. And then if you have a question or comment, you know, moving forward, just politely come right on back in. But right now, I want to address area code 857. 857. Who's calling and where are you calling
Good
from?
afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, beloved. Who is this?
Hi. So I have a question.
Who's calling and where are you calling from?
This is Sherry.
Hey, Sherry.
And I'm calling from Boston, Massachusetts. How are you?
Greetings, greetings. All is a blessing, beloved.
So, my question is, what I have always found fascinating about witchcraft, because I have friends who consider themselves witches, but is the matriarchal practice, is that something that goes along with ATR also? Because I have a question about something that I had seen, and the person was saying that some of ATR has gotten away from the matriarchal spirit, the matriarchal functioning of the practice, as you know, as Christianity has, as Islam has, you know, all the other religions, you know, have become patriarchal, and that is not how things are actually supposed to work. I don't know if that's the way to put that, but I'm curious about that aspect of it.
I'm curious about your question. I just heard you give a whole lot of your opinion and your idea. Your question was lost. I didn't hear your question.
Oh, is it the choppiness?
No. I heard every word. I didn't hear your question.
Well, is ATR matriarchal in practice?
Okay, now that I can respond to. All world religions, all world traditions are matriarchal. The first thing, when we go back to the indigenous world, when we go back to the original world, it was matriarchal. Whether you're talking about England, whether you're talking about Africa, whether you're talking about Asia, whether you're talking about South America, it's matriarchal. God was female. The goddess created the universe. That switch to masculinity, yes, shows up in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and to some degree shows up today in what I call the Orisha romance. And when I say the Orisha romance, I'm being shady. I'm being facetious, because often the demonstrations of Yoruba, of Ifa, that we're seeing, and particularly in this format, social media, is not accurate to the authentic practice. So you get this idea that somehow Ifa is male dominated. Somehow the leaders of Ifa are somehow men. And that's not accurate either. Without Iyami and the power of Iyami, which is often symbolized by a bird, So now, as you look at Yoruba, as you look at Voodoo, I want you to start looking for birds on top of the staff, on top of the hats, the crowns, implied in the wood and the carving. I want you to start looking for the birds. Now that you know it's there, and you'll realize that Iyami is everywhere. Ain't no voodoo without the energy, the feminine power. There's no nature without the feminine power. So, yeah, I know the illusion is male dominance. And with world dominance of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, we get that, you know, that reaffirmed male dominant energy. But that's not the truth. That's not the reality. And so I agree with you that it's absolutely matriarchal. Now, I think where things get lost is, again, well, let me say this. Do ye not know, and I'm talking to the men, do you not know that you are all female until the third trimester? No woman gets pregnant and the next day she's pregnant with a boy. No woman. The baby doesn't form male hormones, penis, any male stuff until the woman is in her third trimester, the last 3 months of her pregnancy. And as a side note, think about preemies and the lack of time in fulfilling that last trimester, and particularly how it affects and relates to boys and men. So the society, beloved, is off balance, both men and women, in sort of this forced masculinity, this forced male supremacy. And it shows up just like white supremacy in many world religions, to include how we see Yoruba, how we view Yoruba. But if you understand Yoruba from a more indigenous, on the ground perspective, it's not male dominated. It's not led by men. Men are not at the height of the top of the hierarchy. Women are. Even we look at the Ifa implements and the tools and the symbols. Look for the woman and look for the breast and look for the birds. You're finding a limited number of overt male symbolism in that way. So I agree with you 100%. And it is a problem when it's not in balance, when either is not in balance. I know you spoke of the same group that I like to speak of, the young witches. Some of them are so moon energy that they have no sun energy at all. They have no grounding, no center. They're easily distracted. They're over here, they're over there. You know, we need a balance of both energies. Mawo Lisa. That's God and Fan. Mawo Lisa. The mother element and the father element unified. This desire to separate male from female, black from white, young from old, rich from poor, that comes from Eurocentric society. That comes from modern society, historically. And I see that as a sickness. I see it as a disease, a dis-ease. I see it as an imbalance, beloved Cherie. I see it as an imbalance. So I agree with you. And it's a problem at every level. Even we look at
it's so weird to me because I'm like, how do we get here?
Even look at the symbols of Islam.
I'm so confused. I always think, like, how do we get to this point?
Look at the symbols of Islam. You know, you got your 5-pointed star, earth, water, fire, air, mind, gas, or ether. Okay, and then you got that crescent moon. And the crescent as opposed to the full moon suggests something that has a cycle, something that must be maintained, something that must be kept in balance. Some might say kept in check, as opposed to a full moon. That five-pointed star also is a representative of humanity, But if the five-pointed star represents humanity, then the six-pointed star represents a male, because that 6 point is the penis, but that five-pointed star has 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, and doesn't suggest anything else is going on down here, except for the Great Mother. So it's in every religion. We look at Catholicism, they got a black goddess, a black Great Mother holding the Christ child tucked away in a secret room, that they're worshiping and acknowledging. So I think even in the confines of these male-dominated traditions, they know the black woman is God. They know the woman is God creator on earth. They know this, but there's an active power, talking about indwelling spirits, there's an active power that would seek to keep that off balance. And we have to ask ourselves why. We have to ask ourselves why, and how are we participating in helping to maintain that imbalance. Y'all are coming with some great questions today, Patrick, Sharif. I really appreciate you all. Area code 510. 510. Your mic is now open. Who's calling and where are you calling from?
Okay, cool. Hey, I'm Deja from California.
Hey, Deja.
Hey, I had a question about the basic consultation. Since you mentioned that you no longer do tarot, I'm wondering if you still do the basic consultations.
I do only complete consultations now. And thank you for asking and giving me an opportunity to speak to that. Because what I'm finding, particularly right now in this season, coronavirus, racism and protests and demonstrations, economic challenges, that even the people who come to me for the basic, we end up talking for an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours. I'm sure that people in this room who've had the basic tarot will tell you that. So it might as well be a complete divination. And often when we go into what the challenge might be, career and education, see, because the basic typically handled career and education, finance, love and relationships, how I earn my living, maybe family conflict, community conflict. That was what the basic was. But when you think about that, that's complex and complete. So, it's really a waste of time, the tarot. I also didn't want to keep reinforcing something that was non-voodoo. We know tarot originated in Africa. We know this. But the way it's demonstrated today, the way it shows up today, it's not quite African enough for me. So that's another reason why I gave it up. I found palm and shell and bone to be more powerful than tarot, to be more detailed than tarot, to be more personal than tarot. And I weaned myself and my callers off of it. And so I would say in the last 2 weeks, nobody has missed the tarot. Even my regulars, they can't even tell that the tarot ain't there anymore. Because the same information that I can gather from the tarot can be gathered from the 16 shell divination, from the palm nut divination. It just has to be interpreted. It just has to be, applied correctly. And that's what sets, your great Babalaos and Hogans and Mambos and Ianifas and Voodoo priests apart. Those who really take the time to memorize these odus and the layers to these odus that fall when you use the shells and palm nuts, and how to personalize it, to each call. It's a very complex system. So if I'm going to be on the phone or in a virtual chat, with someone, or video chat with someone, 90 minutes, they might as well get a complete consultation. So that's all. It's that simple, beloved.
Okay, that's clear to me. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for calling in. All is a blessing. Y'all have really made my day today. You all have been active. You all have been present. Maybe not broadcasting every day is doing some good. maybe I need to broadcast every other day, and y'all might miss me a little bit more. And we have powerful shows like this.
Well, it just goes to show that the need is there, and once we start going over to Patreon and more people become members, then they'll get more exclusive content. And so this is just really a good segue into that.
Yeah.
Great show.
Yeah, because I can understand if someone has never had a reading from me, and you've been looking at tarot, and now the tarot is gone. You have no idea, if you've never had a reading with me, the gravity of my divination to begin with. Now, if you get an opinion or look at my comments and ratings, they'll tell you. Keona will tell you. Many others in Hoodoo occultism will tell you. 2 hours, 3 hours is not uncommon for a reading with me, even when I was doing the tarot. So it just became, it just wasn't fair to me. The tarot just wasn't fair to me, wasn't fair to the house, wasn't fair to the caller. Yeah, it says 30 minutes, but everybody will tell you it's never a 30-minute call. It's always very lengthy and very time consuming. So it just wasn't fair, the way it's set up and the way I have it set up. So I just eliminated it. And, there are plenty of psychics and readers out there, y'all can have tarot. I'm going to let y'all have tarot. Y'all can go ahead and do your tarot and, do your thing. Discovery Channel and Nat Geo, they just wasn't interested in tarot. The History Channel just wasn't interested in tarot. They were interested in this real ancestral rooted tradition that still maintains life even 2,000 years after the introduction of the Bible in Christianity. ATR still maintains life, still maintains its power, still grows, still moves forward. And so I'm just ready for the next level, beloved. That's all, Deja. I'm just ready for the next level, and tarot was not going to get me there. I also found, for my tarot readers who are listening to me, I also found to draw a great deal more parasitic energy, vice-like energy, than other forms of divination. And you all know what I'm talking about. The whiner, the complainer, the obsessed individual, the people who are addicted to readings. Tarot, that's part of the, it draws that. Whereas the Fa and Ifa are really about getting down to the work, are really about result-oriented resolution. So you're not only getting the reading, you're not only getting the message, you're not only getting the mystery, but you're getting things to do, things not to do, things to avoid, things to draw unto you, sacrifices that need to be made. Do I need to say there is no vegan voodoo? There is no vegan voodoo. There is no vegan Ifa. There's blood in this. There's meat in this, So it was just too much to maintain, two ways of viewing spirituality and religion. It in no way limits who can contact me. It in no way limits people of other cultures, other languages, other ethnic groups consulting with me. Just know that I'm consulting from our magical book, from our magical tradition, and that's those 256 Odu's. I'm only operating from Odu from here on out, and the Odu helps to clarify what forces, what powers, what deities might stand up in the reading, whether we're doing work or just looking at it. So I think I've made really the best choice for everyone. And Deja, to answer that last question, what am I using? I'm using 12 shell, 16 shell, 16 palm nut divination, along with kola nut obiobata. I'm using all the traditional forms of divination as they are done, as they are performed in West Africa. Now, if you're looking for a price, now I could still offer, the basic divination, but it's still going to run into 90 minutes, 120 minutes. It might as well be a complete reading. Thank you for asking that and giving me the opportunity to speak to that directly, and have it go into archive, have it be recorded. Am I missing anything in the chat?
That's amazing. You aren't, but a lot of us women, and I speak for some, not the majority, because I know some of y'all are happy, but some of us women are really vexed and hurt and bitter and disappointed by the men. So when you mention that a man isn't fully, or a male is not fully developed until the third trimester, that hit home. What we have, not just limited to African descent, but every male, we have this idea that even as little girls, we're conditioned to be wives and mothers before we know it, playing with dolls. Dolls have strollers, have the playhouse, learning how to clean the playhouse, baking, cooking, everything is gearing us to be a wife and a mother, and we've been trained subconsciously since children. So when we meet this guy, we're willing to ride with him. I've seen women who have been homeless with men, women that are prostitutes themselves and making these men thousands of dollars, men that promise them the world and just disappoint and tell them that it's about money, or better yet, the male that marries you and get a home with you and you love him and you have his babies, and he decides one day he don't want you. And you go from being his best friend, his lover, to his sworn enemy, and you still trying to figure out where he had you effed up at. You understand? I'm just being real.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to figure out how do we get to loving men, to almost worshiping them. I mean, just this nigga, this nigga oral sex. That's basically almost worshiping them, giving them your body, and they drag you and dog you. Like, I really want to get to the healing of that. And I speak for a lot of us. I really do.
It goes back to, again, the God spell, not the gospel, the God, G-O-D, spell, S-P-E-L-L. It's a God spell. And so the whole idea of hierarchy, where the woman is not on top, it's non-indigenous, it's not African at the root. So even if you say, well, I don't go to church, I don't do the Christian thing, it is ingrained in this culture. It is ingrained in this society. And even if you say, well, I'm not going to, and I don't, want to, it's on the TV, it's on the soap operas, it's in the movie, it's in the commercial, and then you start feeling, well, what's wrong with me? If I'm not booed up on Valentine's Day with roses and a box of chocolate, if I'm not booed up, on New Year's Eve, on the balcony somewhere with the champagne, and, there's all these illusions of life that are presented to us through commercialism, advertisements, the need to sell, market, and trade products, goods, and your money. Even when we think about love and relationships and marriage, do y'all realize that the wedding ring is a very new concept, like a few hundred years and younger, created by De Beers to sell diamonds that they didn't stole out of Africa, that they did commandeered out of the motherland. And so they have to create the holiday. That's why I'm very worried about Juneteenth and what happened this year on Juneteenth. Is Juneteenth next year going to be just like Easter, Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Labor Day, Memorial Day? Is it going to be the next commercialized holiday? Is it going to be the next opportunity to put some Black people on TV to represent Walmart and Target and Kmart and JCPenney and whoever for your dollars, for your money? You know, and so now it's another Black holiday or another holiday that the people who are at the top of the food chain are going to get the greatest benefit from, because you don't own no Walmart, you don't own no Kmart, you don't own no Target store. So while you spending in the name of the holiday, in the name of the feel good, all of your money is going to support the family, the mouths, the children, the descendants of people who often don't even care about you, don't even like you. So I where I am in my journey, I don't get it. And I'm sure you don't either. But when we look at the greater society, how do you turn it off? How do you shut it down? I know women, and I'm sure Keon and some of our callers can speak to this. You know, people want to ask you how many kids you got. People want to ask why you not married. You know, they feel entitled to get into a woman's business in that way, because this society, just like the caller says, I think that was Cherie, just like Cherie says, the society has designated that you are a breeder, and here to serve men. And religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism to some degree foster that, support that. Now here recently, I heard, I can't remember who it was on TV, that tried to say, no, that's not real Islam, that women have a real place in Islam, of superiority in Islam, but that's not often being practiced. That's not often taught. It's not often being demonstrated. And so what most people know is the ugly, stereotypical definitions. You know, women walk behind their man in Islam. You know, even they boys' sons, you know, all this kind of stuff. That ain't got nothing to do with Islam. That's got to do with men, culture, society, government, and what we will accept. What we will accept. And right now, we just not accepting it. I just don't know how long this is going to last. Rodney King seemed like it was 2 weeks and we were back to business as usual. It was heartbreaking. I went into a 3-year depression after Rodney King, because that uprising and that we go and make change and then nothing happened. So I'm hopeful right now. I'm hopeful. Area code 305. I'm coming. Right now, I'm hopeful that we might make some changes now. We might make a difference now. But if women don't stand up, if people of the 5 genders don't stand up, if men don't stand up even for yourselves and demand that healing, demand that empathy, demand that sympathy, be a part of what male culture is, it's not going to change readily. It's not going to change soon. And you're still going to have people like us living on the outside of society, living on the outside of acceptance, you know, living on the outside of popularity, you know, until the rest of mainstream society gets it. Area code 305. Who's calling? 305. Who's calling? And where are you calling from? Area code 305. Your hand is raised. Who's calling and where are you calling from?
Greetings, y'all. This is Nikisha giving y'all a call in.
Hey, Nikisha, what's going on, beloved?
Not much. I was just listening. I was typing in the chat as well. And I wanted to just say something to Miss Keon. She's right. But I feel like the men, not all, like I'm not going to say all, some of the men that they are programmed. I mean, I was programmed. I went from not having a baby at the age of 29 to a baby, no baby dad. I'm just saying it that way, which I tell Paul that that's one when I was mad. a baby daddy.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being said, oh, that ain't none of my baby. You know, that's the program thing that the men say, that ain't none of my baby. Well, who baby it is? I ain't left there just hatch it. But it's like they all programmed. Like they watch and see, like monkey see, monkey do. Everybody doing what everybody do, and I'm so glad that I'm not programmed like that no more. And the only holidays that I celebrate is my birthday.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, my Earth Day. I call it my Earth Day because I'm here on Earth. But that's basically it. It's like sad, you know. And I really, I'm just gonna say something. I'm glad I'm at where I'm at now compared to where I was before,
mm-hmm.
because I was a total mess before.
Mm-hmm.
I was a total mess. I mean, oh my gosh, I was a total mess, a total wreck, y'all. I mean, it was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible. Now that I look back, I'm glad I'm not where I was before. I'm glad I'm moving forward. I see movement, but at first I didn't see nothing but stagnant. In trouble. More trouble.
Yeah, and listen, Nikisha, I listened to your words and the words that you use, like you talked about having the baby, and then the man saying, "Well, that ain't my baby," and in my head,
Right.
I immediately heard, "Mama's baby, daddy's maybe." Now, where did that saying come from?
Yes.
Where did that limerick with that rhyme and rhythm to it, where did that come from? It came from slavery. And so we're still dealing with the vestiges
Right.
of white supremacy. Listen, it's so painful, it's so traumatic. Nobody wants to look at it. Nobody wants to address it. Nobody wants to touch it, really. And we keep thinking if we don't talk about it, if we just let it go, just let it be in the past, it's going to just dissolve away. And nothing operates like that. Energy is real, and energy is eternal. So it has to be consciously deprogrammed. Consciously deprogrammed.
Right.
And everything that we do and say, we as Black people have to be conscious that we're not reinforcing it. And then white people have to be conscious that they're not reinforcing it, as well as other ethnic groups. You know, people's behavior right now on Twitter. There are other ethnic groups that feel like this ain't got nothing to do with them at all. You might be brown, you might be Asian, yellow, you might be red, you know, but you're not Black or white. And so you feel like this ain't got nothing to do with you at all. You know, I'm seeing numbers drop in Twitter. I'm seeing people that just ignore the whole topic. They still talking about the regular whatever, you know, and have not made not one note of what's happening right now from a racial perspective. White people seem to be taking some degree of responsibility for it, and Black people have to. We don't have a choice. But when I look at the behaviors of other people in my stream, they don't see us. They still ignoring us. They still don't give a care. You still the Black guy. You still the nigga. And so my long-term vision, and you know, Nikisha, we talk about this a lot on this show. My long-term vision is I got to see it. I got to feel it. I'm not going to be convinced that there's no real change happening until I can feel it. It's real easy to say Black Lives Matter. It's real easy to say, let's do for the Black man, let's do for the Black woman, let's do for the Black children, you know, and that is not trickling down, nor has it ever trickled down in our community. There's no guarantee that Black men are going to do anything for me with any amount of liberation that they are gifted, any more than they're going to do for you, Black woman, Black mother, Black mama baby, white mama baby, Hispanic mama baby, any more than he's going to do for you right now. No magical overnight reparation, no magical overnight dissolving of overt demonstrations of racism is going to nip this. We got to be willing to dissect and go through some surgery, some real spiritual surgery, some real detoxing to remove this from every layer of society. You know, I had some technical issues yesterday, somewhere between Cox Cable and the internet and Hulu and the live stream. And in every call except one, I talked to somebody outside the country, somebody in the Philippines, somebody in Bangladesh, somebody in Asia, and they were negative and rude as hell. Rude as hell. They talk real fast, don't want to give you a chance to talk, don't want to give you a chance to explain your question, don't allow you to get to the question mark on your question, and it has everything to do with race. It's got everything to do with race. Chinese, Indians from India, they don't like us. They have been programmed by white supremacy, by the oppressors, not to like us any more than the white man does. And so we can't just say it's a black and white thing. We can't just say it's an American thing. This is a global cancer. This is a global toxin.
So true. May I be heard?
Please come on in. We got a few minutes, so come on in.
It's so funny you said that about yesterday, because I had to get off of Twitter because the thing about this thing with 90 Americans, us, and Africans that are going on right now on Twitter is like some kind of war. And, you know, I ended up saying yesterday, I was like, I would never, ever speak disrespectfully about Africans as a Black American. I don't understand how you do that. And it breaks my heart. It's like, how does 60 seconds. I always ask this question. Why is this happening? How did we get here? You know, that I hate someone who is my skin folk. Okay. I refuse to play into that. I don't want to do that. We should not be, you know, and it's like I was saying to someone, I was explaining, it's like, you guys, the Chinese, rapidly gobbling up everything in Africa. That would not be happening if we were all on the same page. You got the French, the Germans. We are not each other's enemies. Mm-hmm. Your enemy is right there in your face, and you're not dealing with that person. You're looking at someone who looks like you and seeing them in a disrespectful and disgusting way, and I don't understand that.
You're talking about a pathology. You're describing a pathology. Mental health, insanity. It is said in some circles, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result is insanity. You're describing insanity. And religion plays a role, government plays a role, culture plays a role. Again, I say it, the hand of white supremacy is on everything. And so any notion that you know, one police tragedy, one police lynching is going to put an end to white supremacy is not realistic. I'm supportive of the move. I'm supportive of the reaction. I'm supportive of people protesting. I'm supportive of people being sensitive to it, of any race or color right now. I'm supportive of that. But I'm concerned as a practitioner, how many are going to be willing to do the work? I know how challenging it is for me just to teach ancestors to people, just to get people to set up a shrine in a very specific way, you know, and show some honor to it within a certain amount of days or weeks, in some cases months, even years. And I know how challenging that is, just to get people to say Egu Mopeo, just to get people to say Alafia, Baboni, you know, just to get people to say common things that might not register with what we say every day, what we do every day, what we suggest every day. So I'm concerned. I'm concerned that when we have this tug of war between black and white racism, that no one's addressing the Chinese, no one is addressing the Asians, the Japanese, no one's addressing the Koreans, no one's addressing the Arabs, no one's addressing every other level of white supremacy and racism that we are confronted with often in our own communities each and every day. Because when you go to that Arab corner store, where's the white man? while you shopping at the Arab corner store, behind glass that thick, you know, with them watching you. Where's the white man then? So it's too many layers to this. It's too many layers to racism. It's too many layers to white supremacy. And I'm not suggesting that they cannot be done. It absolutely can be done. I'm just concerned about the society that we live in right now and its willingness to do the work, to move beyond apathy. Because you might not be an active racist. You might not be an active contributor to the problem, but apathy is just as powerful. And apathy shows up as not caring, not feeling, not being bothered. It don't affect me. It's over there. It's not here. I got too much to worry about on my own plate. I got to worry about my own house. That's apathy. That's apathy, and it keeps racism and white supremacy alive. I make Asia and India and South America and every nation on the planet I hold responsible for either participating in the Middle Passage or sitting back and watching it happen and not trying to stop it. So that's why there's so much tension between Black folk and really almost every other ethnicity that that enters the country. You know, the Republicans play off of, you know, they're taking our jobs, they're overcoming our community, they're overcoming our nation, you know, but now Blacks play into that, you know, and we're used as a pawn in that chess game. You know, it's us against the Latins, it's us against the Hispanics, it's us against, you know, whoever, the Jews, it's us against the Asians, while the system of white supremacy goes on business as usual. Primarily on our apathy, primarily on our unwillingness to speak up. Well, I don't want to be a problem. Well, I don't want to interrupt my day. Well, I don't want to stop and write this letter. I don't want to have to call my congressman. You know, it's just too many things that we can do to be active in this battle, you know, rather than to be apathetic, rather than to just sit. Listen, I'm going to wrap it up shortly unless someone has a question or comment. If you're on the phone lines, you are one of the blessed few. your mics are already open, so if you have something to say, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up.
This is Patrick again. And I guess
come on in, Patrick.
One of the things that's really been highlighted to me is the power of narrative and the power of media, especially when it comes to how we see how the world sort of views a specific class of people, like Black people. And I put it in the chat earlier, like I had a Chinese roommate, and going to a university, I've met so many different people, and being some people's first white person that they experienced in real life. It's just so interesting how people who would have never even seen people who look like come in with such harsh sort of like stereotypes, and it really highlighted the power of that. And like you say, it's what runs behind everything, and what never goes questioned, really, and how it's visionary. And how, you know, like you said to me earlier, we have to look at what we do to other people within our own country. And so, in that system of white supremacy that then would have Black, it pits minorities against minorities, and then we know that we have like companies and all these people outsourcing them making decisions to take work outside of this country, but then they flip the narrative and they say that someone else is coming in and taking our jobs. But at the same time, in my mind, it's just so like apparent and obvious. Like, how can you on one hand take the work out, say you're outsourcing it to somewhere else, and then point the finger and say that somebody else is coming in to take these jobs? Like, it's the way that it's just worked on so many levels, in so many people, just like blows my mind.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially when it's so upfront. Okay.
So upfront, overt.
Patrick, I agree.
Yeah,
upfront, overt.
It's not real. That's the thing. It's like, it's not real. None of it is all an illusion. It's all a deception. And it's like, how can I see this and no one else can tell?
That's why I said we have to really say that again.
Pushing up against this wall. It's just like a frog jumping on instead of hitting the wall, bumping his head. Boom. Keep jumping. Boom.
That's right.
But they don't want to acknowledge the truth. They don't want to go the other way. They want to go right now in front of them.
And that's why I say we have to look at mental health. We have to look at demon possession. We have to look at indwelling spirits. Listen, we've looked at everything else. We checked everything else. We've tried everything else. We've given the pharmaceutical company, free reign, for about 100 years or more. It's now time for us to check something else. And each one of you all made a very valid point just now. Like the frog bumping his head against the wall. It does sound insane. It does look crazy. It doesn't make any sense. It should be more obvious. It should be more overt to people. So why isn't it? Why isn't it? Everybody can't be drunk at the same time all the time. Everybody can't be high on something at the same time all the time. We're not all crazy. We're not all falling off. Yet you have this developing. Yet you have this pattern developing that we all can see. Those with that third eye open. Those who are operating in the spirit. Please forgive me. I've muted everybody. I have to move forward. I have to move forward. I got appointments. I got people chomping at the bit, waiting to get in contact with me. But I appreciate you. I love you. I support you. Remember to be kind, to be still, to be happy, to be grateful, to be thankful, to be prayerful, to be patient, be mindful, be discerning, be wise, be practical, be erudite, be aware, be love, be proactive, be available, be encouraged, be strong, be phenomenal, be smart, be peace, be safe, and be still. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Until next time, I'm going to leave you with a little Ben E. Hunter, New Orleans own Ben E. Hunter Gregory suit. All is a blessing.
A dash of cayenne to the roof. Gonna put on my green suit. Boil a gumbo, hot and steady. Don't care if ready. Gonna bring at that old cemetery. Down on Claiborne where she's buried. Build a fire on the bayou. When the black cat scratch at you. Under a full moon that's blue. Chant the magic words will follow. A dash of cayenne to the roof. Gonna put on my grease. Black top hat, black suit too. They will rock, let me move this. I'm gonna get them balls out the graveyard for you.
You can see my eyes.
See my eyes. like she's too. A dash of cayenne blue. Gonna put on my